Okay, live. This is about the only decoration I got in here. That is a little Snoopy counter that tells us how many days, hours, and minutes before Christmas. I got some Christmas stuff up. I got 2 guest readers today. I'm going to let the first one come in, and she's going to read a book called Strong, Wonderful You. And Savea, there you go. Make sure you show your pages.
Okay. I'm going to be reading Strong, Wonderful You first. What makes you wonderful and beautiful too? What makes you special and uniquely too? You. Your kindness, caring, and great big heart, it's these small things that set you apart. It's how you treat others and how you treat you. Just embrace what you love and we'll love you too. Nobody is perfect, but you're pretty close. Being uniquely you is what I love most. Dance your own dance. Make up your own song. Being just you is where you belong. You're always so loved just who you are. In my opinion, you're a superstar. Stay strong, beautiful, and wonderful too. Always know I'll forever love you. The end. Raylan! We have our next guest coming. Hopeful rainbows.
Talk loud too.
Rainbows are beautiful. Isn't that true? We're all different colors. Us, me, and you. Life is better with color. At the end of the day, without color, the world would simply be gray. It's good to be different and to give others a turn. When we take times to listen, there is so much we can learn. We're better together. Let's say it out loud. The world needs its rainbows. Hold hands and be proud. we all make rainbow.
Okay, are you done?
Pawpaw.
I gotta read for a minute, alright? I'll just bring it in there to you guys. Thank you. Oh, are you gonna help me? Do you want to read with me? Yeah? Okay, here. Let me get you up here. We're gonna read this one. This Little House on the Prairie. Can you say hi?
Hi.
Hi. And we're reading Little House, Christmas on the Prairie. And it says, Laura is 6 years old now. She and her folks have traveled in their covered wagon all the way from the big woods of Wisconsin to a new little house. This one, you want to try to read that one? This one on the wide open prairie in Indian Territory. Cold rain has been falling for days and days, and Laura and Mary are very worried, for they know Santa Claus needs snow in order to visit the house on the prairie. But Christmas is almost here, and there's no sign of snow anywhere, only more and more rain from the cold gray skies. Will there be no Christmas this year? Mr. Edwards meets Santa Claus. The days were short and cold, the wind whistled sharply, but there was no snow. Cold rains were falling. Day after day the rain fell, pattering on the roof and pouring from the eaves. Mary and Laura stayed close by the fire, sewing their 9-patch quilt blocks and cutting paper dolls from scraps. You gonna go in there with the girls? Okay. Mary and Laura stayed close by the fire, sewing their 9-patch quilt blocks and cutting paper dolls from scraps of wrapping paper, and hearing the wet sound of rain. Every night was so cold that they expected to see snow the next morning, but in the morning they saw only sad, wet grass. Kind of hard to see what that is, isn't it? They pressed their nose against the squares of glass in the windows that Paul had made, and they were glad they could see out, but they wished they could see snow. Laura was anxious because Christmas was near, and Santa Claus and his reindeer could not travel without snow. Mary was afraid that even if it snowed, Santa Claus could not find them, so far away in Indian Territory. When they asked Ma about this, she said she didn't know. What day is it? They asked her anxiously. How many more days till Christmas? And they counted off the days on their fingers till there were only one more day left. What, baby? You can read a book. You want to read with me, or you can go in there? Okay. Rain was still falling that morning. There was not one crack in the gray sky. They felt almost sure there would be no Christmas. Still, they kept hoping. Just before noon, the light changed. The clouds broke and drifted apart, shining white in a clear blue sky. The sun shone, birds sang, and thousands of drops of water sparkled on the grasses. But when Ma opened the door to let in the fresh, cold air, they heard the creek roaring. They had not thought about this creek. Now they knew they would have no Christmas because Santa Claus could not cross the roaring creek. Pa came in, bringing the fat turkey. If it weighed less than 20 pounds, he said, he'd eat it, feathers and all. He asked Laura, how's that for Christmas dinner? Do you think you can manage one of those drumsticks? She said yes, she could. But she was sober. Then Mary asked him if the creek was going down, and he said it was still rising. Ma said it was too bad. She hated to think of Mr. Edwards eating his bachelor cooking all alone on Christmas Day. Mr. Edwards had been asked to eat Christmas dinner with them, but Pa shook his head and said a man would risk his neck trying to cross that creek right now. No, he said, that current's too strong. We'll just have to make up our minds that Edwards won't be here tomorrow. Of course, that meant that Santa Claus could not come either. Laura and Mary tried not to mind too much. They watched Ma dress the wild turkeys, and it was a very fat turkey. They were lucky little girls to have a good house to live in and a warm fire to sit by, and such a turkey for their Christmas dinner. Ma said so, and it was true. Ma said it was too bad that Santa Claus couldn't come this year, but they were such good girls that he hadn't forgotten them. He would surely come next year. Still, they were not happy. After supper that night, they washed their hands and faces, buttoned their red flannel nightgowns, tied their nightcap strings, and soberly said their prayers. They lay down in bed and pulled the covers up. It did not seem at all like Christmas time. Pa and Ma sat silent by the fire. After a while, Ma asked Pa why didn't he play the fiddle, and he said, "I don't seem to have the heart to, Carolyn." After a while, Ma suddenly stood up. "I'm going to hang up your stockings, girls," she said. "Maybe something will happen." Laura's heart jumped, but then she thought again of the creek, and she knew nothing could happen. Ma took one of Mary's clean stockings and one of Laura's, and she hung them from the mantel shelf on either side of the fireplace. Laura and Mary watched her over the edge of the bed covers. "Now go to sleep," Ma said, kissing them goodnight. "Morning will come quicker if you're asleep." She sat down again by the fire, and Laura almost went to sleep. She woke up a little when she heard Pa say, "You've only made it worse, Carolyn." And she thought she heard Ma say, "No, Charles, there's white sugar." But perhaps she was dreaming. Then she heard Jack growl savagely. The door latch rattled, and someone said, "Ingalls! Ingalls!" Paul was stirring up the fire, and when he opened the door, Laura saw it was morning. The outdoors was gray. "Great fish hooks, Edwards! Come in, man! What happened?" Pa exclaimed. Laura saw the stockings limply dangling, and she scrooged her shut eyes into the pillow. She heard Pa piling wood on the fire, and she heard Mr. Edwards say that he had carried his clothes on his head when he swam the creek. His teeth rattled and his voice shivered. He would be all right, he said, as soon as he got warm. "It was too big a risk, Edwards. We're glad you're here, but that was too big a risk for a Christmas dinner." "Your little ones had to have a Christmas," Mr. Edwards replied. "No creek would stop me after I fetched them gifts from Independence." Laura sat straight up in bed. "Did you see Santa Claus?" she shouted. "I sure did," Mr. Edwards said. "Where? When? What did he look like? What did he say? Did he really give you something for us?" Mara and Laura cried. Wait a minute," Mr. Edwards laughed. "And Ma said she would put the presents in the stockings as Santa Claus intended. She said they mustn't look." Mr. Edwards came and sat on the floor by their beds, and he answered every question they asked him. They honestly tried not to look at Ma, and they didn't quite see what she was doing. When he saw the creek rising, Mr. Edwards said he had known that Santa Claus could not get across it. "But you crossed it," Laura said. "Yes," Mr. Edwards replied, "but Santa Claus is too old and fat. He couldn't make it, where a long, lean razorback like me could do so." And Mr. Edwards reasoned that if Santa Claus couldn't cross the creek, likely he would come no further south than Independence. Why should he come 40 miles across the prairie only to be turned back? Of course he wouldn't do that. So Mr. Edwards had walked to Independence in the rain, Mary asked. Mr. Edwards said he wore his rubber coat, and there, coming down the street in Independence, he had met Santa Claus. "In the daytime?" Laura asked. She hadn't thought that anyone could see Santa Claus in the daytime. "No," Mr. Edwards said, "it was night, but light shone across the street from the saloons." "Well, the first thing Santa Claus said was, 'Hello, Edwards.'" "Did he know you?" Mary asked. Laura asked, How did you know he was really Santa Claus?" Mr. Edwards said that Santa Claus knew everybody, and he had recognized Santa at once by his whiskers. Santa Claus had the longest, thickest, whitest set of whiskers west of the Mississippi. So Santa Claus said, "Hello, Edwards. Last time I saw you, you were sleeping on a corn shuck bed in Tennessee." And Mr. Edwards well remembered the little pair of red yarn mittens that Santa Claus had left for him that time. Then Santa Claus said, "I understand you're living down along the Verdigris River. Have you ever met up down yonder with those two little young girls named Mary and Laura?" I surely am acquainted with them," Mr. Edwards replied. "It rests heavy on my mind," said Santa Claus. "They are both of them sweet, pretty good little young things, and I know they are expecting me. I surely do hate to disappoint two good little girls like them. Yet, with the water up the way it is, I can't ever make it across that creek. I can figure no way whatsoever to get to their cabin this year, Edwards. Santa Claus said, would you do me a favor to fetch them their gifts this one time? I'll do that, and with pleasure, Mr. Edwards told him. Then Santa Claus and Mr. Edwards stepped across the street to the hitching post where the pack mule was tied. Didn't he have a reindeer? Laura asked. You know he couldn't, Mary said. There isn't any snow. Exactly, said Mr. Edwards. Santa Claus traveled with a pack mule in the Southwest. And Santa Claus uncinched the pack and looked through it and took out the presents for Mary and Laura. Oh, what are they? Laura cried, and Mary asked, then what did he do? Then he shook hands with Mr. Edwards and he swung up on his fine bay horse. Santa Claus rode well for a man of his weight and build. He tucked his long white whiskers under the bandana. So long, Edwards, he said, and he rode away on the Fort Dodge Trail, leading his pack mule and whistling. Laura and Mary were silent an instant thinking of that. Then Ma said, you may look now, girls. And something was shiny bright on the top of Laura's stocking. She squealed and jumped out of bed. So did Mary and Laura. But Laura beat her to the fireplace, and the shining thing was a glittering new tin cup. Mary had one exactly like it. These new tin cups were their very own. Now they each had a cup to drink out of. Laura jumped up and down and shouted and laughed, but Mary stood still and looked with shining eyes at her own tin cup. Then they plunged their hands into their stockings again, and they pulled out two long sticks of candy. It was peppermint candy, striped red and white. They looked and looked at the beautiful candy, and Laura licked her stick just one lick. But Mary was not so greedy. She didn't take even one lick of hers. Those stockings weren't empty yet. Mary and Laura pulled out two small packages. They unwrapped them, and each found a little heart-shaped cake. Over the delicate brown tops was sprinkled white sugar. The sparkling grains lay like tiny drifts of snow. The cakes were too pretty to eat. Mary and Laura just looked at them, but at last Laura turned hers over, and she nibbled a tiny nibble from underneath, where it wouldn't show. And the inside of the little cake was white, and it had been made of pure white flour and sweetened with white sugar. Laura and Mary never would have looked at their stockings again. The cups and the cakes and the candy were almost too much. They were too happy to speak, but Ma asked if they were sure the stockings were empty. Then they put their hands down inside them to make sure, and in the very toe of each stocking was a shiny, bright new penny. They had never even thought of such a thing as having a penny. Think of having a whole penny for your very own. Think of having a cup and a cake and a stick of candy and a penny. There never had been such a Christmas. Now, of course, right away, Laura and Mary should have thanked Mr. Edwards for bringing those lovely presents all the way from Independence, but they had forgotten all about Mr. Edwards. They had even forgotten Santa Claus. In a minute they would have remembered, but before they did, Ma said gently, aren't you going to thank Mr. Edwards? Oh, thank you, Mr. Edwards, thank you, they said, and they meant it with all their hearts. Paul shook Mr. Edwards' hand, too, and shook it again. Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards acted as if they were almost crying. Laura didn't know why, so she gazed again at her beautiful presents. She looked up again when Ma gasps, and Mr. Edwards was taking sweet potatoes out of his pockets. He said they had helped to balance the package on his head when he swam across the creek. He thought Pa and Ma liked them with the Christmas turkey. There were 9 sweet potatoes. Mr. Edwards had brought them all the way from town too, and it was just too much. Pa said so. It's too much, Edwards, he said. They never could thank him enough. Mary and Laura were too excited to eat breakfast. They drank the milk from their shining new cups, but they could not swallow the rabbit stew and the cornmeal mush. Don't make them, Charles, Ma said. It will soon be dinner time. For Christmas dinner, there was a tender, juicy roasted turkey. There were the sweet potatoes, baked in the ashes, carefully whipped so that they could eat the skins too. There was a loaf of salt-rising bread made from the last of the white flour, and after all that, there were stewed dried blackberries and little cakes. But these little cakes were made with brown sugar. They did not have white sugar sprinkled over the tops. Then Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards sat by the fire and talked about Christmas times back in Tennessee and up north in the big woods. But Mary and Laura looked at their beautiful cakes and played with their pennies and drank their water out of their new cups. And little by little they licked and sucked their sticks of candies, until each stick was sharp point at one end. That was a happy Christmas. That was a happy Christmas. And that story, just like I put in the description, I don't know if the adults that are watching with you kids, if they'll read the description to you, but the movie magic thing that we're doing next weekend, the first show that we're going to watch is the first pilot episode of the Little House on the Prairie show, which is the one that ends the way that this story does, the one that we just read. And we'll put this up too. And let me see, we'll do the last reading from Feeling Grateful, How to Add More Goodness to Your Gladness. And this week it says, share your gifts and help others to unwrap their own. We'll put that one back in the bookmark in the queue. And we're going to turn this around real quick, and we're going to do a different thing at the end than we normally do. This one says, who very soon will come our way? Santa very soon will come our way. 8 little reindeer pull his sleigh. Santa's little reindeer pull his sleigh. Reindeer sleigh, come our way. Ho, 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 cherry nose. Cap on head, suit that's red. Special night, beard that's white. Must be Santa, must be Santa, must be Santa. Santa Claus. Now, we're going to walk through the house real quick, and we're going to let the girls say goodbye. And everybody's going to say goodbye, Merry Christmas.
Bye, Merry Christmas. Bye, Merry Christmas.
Lena, say bye, Merry Christmas. Lena.
Lena.
Bye, Merry Christmas.
Bye, say bye, Merry Christmas.
Yep, she said yes. Okay.